Hi and welcome to a podcast about combat in cEDH. It's combat making a comeback. That's what we're here to talk about today, and a little bit how to think and practice it. With me today, I have my co-host William. Missed you, man.
Yeah, I miss you too, man. Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. So normally we sit in the same room, but because of the coronavirus, it's better to stay where we are.
Hopefully it turns out well.
Yeah. So combat in cEDH is not really common. You see, combo is the better strategy. So beating your opponents down 120 life is really tricky. So we don't really see that much combat at all in this format.
No, we don't. And it's not only because of the combat-oriented format that we're playing. It's a multiplayer format. Multiplayer means that closing out the game with combat becomes harder, as well as the best way to fight off creatures tend to be board wipes. And when you have multiple people who has access to these board wipes as their weapon of choice, it becomes complicated to have a great board presence enough to pressure 40 life.
Yeah. I also
Yeah.
think the problem is that it's a selection. You begin with one player, then you go to the next player, then you go to the third player. And when you're attacking someone, you force that person to spend resources trying to survive. And then eventually,
Yeah.
the third person and the last person you decide to kill is just sitting there and building a huge combo board state and then wins when you're done killing the two other players.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in a normal game of Magic, non-multiplayer, non-commander, you have to deal 20 damage to win the game.
Yeah.
But when you are in commander, essentially, you need to deal 120 damage, or
Yeah.
depending on how many players, less. You're still playing the same game, but you need to do so much more damage. Combat wouldn't be viable in normal, modern, or standard, for example, if people had 100 life or 80 life or
Yeah.
even just 40
Yeah.
lives. Yeah.
Games would be very strange in modern with 100 life.
Yeah, decks like control decks and Tron decks would just run the table. It's a completely different game because no aggro would be viable,
Yeah. And it's still the
pretty
same
much.
thing with Voltron. If you go commander damage, you don't need to do 63 damage to three players, and then you kill them all.
Yeah.
That is also still tricky because you have to focus everything at one guy, and as long as they just keep killing your one guy, then that ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, then you run into the problem where if you simply fold the spot removal, like two spot removals, and you're in big trouble. It also takes just too long. People tend to call CH a turn 3, 4, 5 format, which is it tend to be when you have to be able to win, but it's usually not when the game ends. But that said, if all you're doing is trying to put pressure on your opponent's life total, you're not playing your commander and doing 21 damage with it in the first 4 turns anyway. So the deck it's just not viable in that sense.
Yeah, I agree. And but combat actually kind of happens a little bit. If we go back in history, there was pretty much zero combat at all. But then there's the Tymna the Weaver came, and you could actually gain some value going to war. And then there's cards that are demanding your life total. So there are some purposes actually hitting people to decrease the life. So when is combat actually useful in this format, do you think?
I think, like you said, there are multiple cards that you pay life to get an advantage, greatness and a cost, right? But when you have those kind of players at the table, you can pressure those cards. Like someone who's at 10 life is not going to cost ad nauseum.
No.
And you have things like fetch lands and necropotence, and there's so many cards nowadays. Now even Bola Citadel is a very valid win condition that usually
Yeah.
require at least some health to get going, right?
Yeah.
So pressuring someone's life from 40 to about 2015 somewhere, you start actually hurting their strategies. 40 life is
Yes.
still a lot, but there's a lot of good creatures, and there's no reason not to pressure the life total if you have them, because it kind of comes for free, right? If you want
Yeah.
to play Dark Confidant or Tymna, you don't play those cards to attack the opponent. They just Tymna has to attack, and Dark Confidant just happen to be able to attack. And
Yes.
if you can't attack, you just do it, right? So I think that it becomes an added bonus of some cards
Yeah,
when you
it's
get a
like
board presence.
you have an mana crypt, it's going to tick on your life, and I have a random
Yeah.
Aven Mind Sensor, I might just hit you so that, if, who knows, maybe you will actually die to your Mana Crypt. It could theoretically happen.
I
And
mean,
just
yeah, decks fizzle.
yeah,
Clearly. So when when you put pressure on someone, you kind of make like a small bet that doesn't cost very much for you to do. You know, deciding I'm going to attack you with my main Aven Mind Sensor doesn't hurt you really,
no.
but making that decision, it's kind of making a bet saying if everyone fizzles, which does happen, I'm going to kill you. And you can pick the person who is the most likely to die from it, aka if they have a mana crypt in play or if they want to play ad nauseum, or you simply just pick someone to pressure them because you think they're the largest threat. So
Yes.
once everyone fizzles, there's happens like a subset of games do fizzle. Then maybe that person is the first to go before people can start recovering, because people start recovering after a while.
I've actually seen this happen a few times when, let's say, there are 3 competitive players, and then you have 1 casual player joining the competitive table, and every competitive player is explaining, okay, we're gonna be playing competitively, we're gonna have some really strong combo decks, we're gonna try to win turn 2 or 3, and the casual players, yeah, okay, it's fine, I will play with you anyway, it's gonna be fun, I will lose, but I don't care. And then they sit there, the competitive players are interacting, making sure no one is combo offing winning, and then the casual player suddenly reaches the mana, he puts Avenger of Zendikar into play, cracks a fetch, Evolving Wilds, because he doesn't play fetch lands, and then suddenly has a bunch of 2/3s.
Slamming, yeah.
Yeah, and then suddenly the casual player actually wins.
I've seen it. I've seen this happen a ton. I've seen this happen a ton.
Yeah.
I even think that at a 4-player, like, because of this, at a 4-player game, I think a casual player has a fair win rate. They're not going to win consistently, but they're going to have a fair win rate. Yeah, right. It's going to be much better than their deck should allow.
Yeah.
But I did that. I got tired of the meta being really grindy, the game slowing down to a halt, because I played a really fast combo deck. I played Breya ad nauseum, and I got tired of it. So I brought my Crash deck, which is my casual deck. I just put in a third of the deck is ramp, a third of the deck is lands, and a third of the deck is creatures and cards that rewards big creatures. And turns out, if you fizzle, cEDH decks can't handle me slamming Inferno Titan on turn 4, Grave Titan on turn 5, and then just, like, I don't know, Crater Hoof Behemoth on turn 6. Like,
we're not made to actually handle that. We have like 3 board wipes. There's Toxic Deluge, a Cyclonic Rift, and maybe one more, and that's it.
Yeah, like, you can play one more. There's a bunch of alternatives where you can put in that slot, but there's essentially no deck, except there's a few that really likes the low board wipes, Massacre, Pyroclasm. I play that in my cast control deck right now. I play
but that isn't
5
even
or 6.
Like, Massacre
But that doesn't work if you have
them.
big creatures. Yeah, it doesn't work on the big creatures. So other than that, I don't think there is any, like, unmetized, like a deck that's not built for a specific meta that plays more than 3 board wipes. Like, used wouldn't. It's just really bad.
Yeah. Probably
you won't touch Deluge.
Probably the best board wipe you could play against those kind of decks is the Blasphemous Act, because it's probably going to be 1 red mana to cast it. The problem with why we don't actually play it in cEDH is because Dark Confidant and Ad Nauseam, it would cost about 9 life to actually hit that thing.
Yeah,
so there's no
mana drain.
Oh, mana drain. Yeah, you don't want that to be mana drain.
Yeah.
So don't play Blasphemous Act in cEDH decks.
Yeah, I think that we end up on we end up on, like, the board as we play, because we need them to be low to the ground. Like, usually the threats aren't big enough, so we don't want to pay the mana and pay the opportunity cost to have cards that actually deal with the big cards. And the end result is that you play 3 board wipes and 3 spot removal in your deck, and that's fine. But you can't handle Slow and Slamming Titans.
No. Eventually, you will crumble under the pressure.
Right.
So what can we actually learn from this? Mm-hmm. Because if it is possible to actually beat FaZe in a game or 2, what could competitive decks actually take from this? Because if you have a really good combo deck and you have a lot of good interaction, but you also have the option of going a little bit to war, and if the game becomes that fizzle game that we talked about, what could we actually, like, could we build a little bit more focused? Let's call it a plan C backup beatdown plan.
Yeah, look, when everyone fizzles, the strongest combat deck tends to win. Like, you have some decks that has a lot of alternative win cons, and, like, sure, you fizzle and then you move on to alternative win con. That usually takes too long. I think if you have a plan C combo, I'd say that the opportunity cost of having those cards in your deck costs more than the gain. Because the thing about creatures is that they're really good. So you'll play them anyway. So if you aim to be the strongest deck after everyone fizzles, I think that's a good starting point. Like, how do I become, without sacrificing the core idea of the deck, how do I become the strongest player at the table on average once everyone has fizzled? Because it does happen.
That is a very good point. I really like you pointing that out. You should never
Yeah.
sacrifice a plan A or your consistency or your speed just because you want to make your plan C better. You should try to see if you can find a really solid functional deck that will also have maybe a combat potential in it.
Yeah. So when you're building your deck, you can just, if you happen to decide between two cards, say you have a black card drawing spot, you could pick Dark Confront over Phyrexian Arena. One makes you weaker to combat, and one makes you stronger in combat. Like decisions like that where you kind of have to just give some weight to the idea that this creature will help me pressure my opponents if the game goes long, essentially, if the game fizzles.
A good example here is I really like Final of Devastation. It's essentially 2 mana, and then the creature's mana cost to tutor for a creature. It's the same as casting a demonic tutor and then paying the mana for that creature. But if you actually reach to that weird situation where you have 12 mana, you pay X into it and you kind of overrun your opponents.
Yeah, effects like that is very interesting because it tends to be that we play small creatures in cEDH. Like the creatures tend to be very small, and they can create some pressure, yes. But the awkward thing about small creatures is if opponent has something that's slightly larger. So like there's a few 2/5s and a few 3/3s that we play, and
there's
generally they block everything.
Yeah, like Kenrith is a 5/5, and
yeah, sure. There's a bunch of commanders that are massive. Yeah, there's a bunch of commanders that are massive. So yeah, exactly. So and even like something, Tasigur and Breya, these cards are really awkward to fight through if you're trying to kill them with elves and Dark Confidants. Like you just can't attack.
Yeah.
So that's also a way to do it, where you kind of slowly you build up your board, and then you have a way to take advantage of having that critical mass of creatures. Whether it's like maybe it's like a sacrifice outlet, or it's an overrun effect like Final Devastation. I think that's a good way to approach it too. I think it's mostly about taking advantage of what you have. A person who's pretty new to the format, they might not think about these things when they're building their deck. Like they don't see the advantage there is. Like there's almost an advantage to everything if you actually use it. Like playing a ton of creatures that are small. Maybe you play those because they do what you want. They make a mana, they draw you cards, whatever. But if you realize that, I have a ton of creatures, cards like Final Devastation go up in value.
Yes.
You could play those cards because of that. And it's kind of those, I wouldn't call it interaction, but synergies.
It's a small synergy. Yeah.
It's a small synergy, but it becomes very meaningful when you add them up. Like that's what good deck building actually does. It's like these things kind of like that oil the machinery when you're playing.
Yeah. A good example of that is I had a Celius Persecution. It's a white and a black. Each opponent's creatures get -1/-1, and all of yours get +1/+1. It's a 2 mana cost, semi board wipe, semi overrun. It's not really doing all of the things, but it's doing something along the way towards that pathway.
I really like it overall. I played it a lot. I played in Blood Pod because there was so many Tymna decks that tried to do similar things that I was doing. And when you play that card, you just devastate your opponent. Like if you do an alpha swing and both of you have very small creatures, which is a very common thing in these board stalls, and you have Zealous, like it's absolutely a blowout. Like it might as well be a one-sided board wipe.
Yeah, and it's also instant speed, so it's a combat trick actually.
2 mana instant speed combat trick. It's a tiny board wipe. It's a tiny overrun. It does everything you want.
It's a multi-purpose card, kind of.
Yes, the power level is not that high. I cut it after a while. It's kind of meta dependent, but
we basically
it's still good when it's good.
That's a good point, because if you look at cEDH decks in general, we aren't really focused at synergy, and you should probably avoid synergy and just look at the most broken cards, most individually good cards, and pick those. But for a synergy card to be good, both cards together have to become equally good to other individual cards. And that's really tricky, and I think that's why we're avoiding synergy in general. So Final Devastation and just a whole bunch of mana dorks, that is a small synergy, but it's not hurting the deck in any form of way anyways.
Absolutely. I think that the number one concern has to be like raw power. And then secondly, it has to be able to interact with your opponent's raw power, because that is what's going to decide the game. But I
Yeah.
think when it comes to deck building, just thinking about these small synergies that gets added up and can help you decide some games. I think that a good example is a Yi-Zen deck. Like a Yi-Zen deck tends to swarm the board with a lot of small creatures, and there are a bunch of cards that you could potentially play in Yi-Zen that are good on their own, but they make you kind of win this small creature battle in the end.
Yes.
And you know that this usually it's creatures, because since we're discussing combats, it's going to be a lot of creatures, and a lot of times it's like a small buff to all your creatures, similar to Zealous conscriptions. It's it is usually enough to kind of threaten your opponents way more than you think they do.
Yeah. Especially considering that people are actually throwing away their life. They're using their life as a resource. You can actually play a little bit on that.
Yeah.
The meta game is very like Oddnos, Sylvan Library, Necropotence, Dark Confluence. There's a lot of stuff that is killing us.
It's even worse if your opponent's trying to do that at the same time with creatures.
Yeah, then suddenly you can't use that resource. But it's a good point that you're saying here, that the card should be individually good on its own and also kind of synergize a little bit. Those are the cards you're looking for. So
when
if
you
you
evaluate
don't,
card, just add it in.
Yeah.
Like add it in as a thought. You know, when you're evaluating two cards, decide. You know, if you think about Pyroclasm and an overrun effect. If you're trying to decide, what kind of card you want to play, you can take into account. You have to take into account like synergies, like having creatures and playing Pyroclasm. Assuming the creature is small, that is kind of like an anti-synergy, right? So you have to consider that. That kind of thinking is very obvious to people, but I think that people generally don't think it's as obvious or don't notice it as well when there's something to the positive side. It's easy to see that, hey, probably don't play, destroy all artifacts if you're playing an artifact deck. That is obvious. But playing cards that slightly help strategies that you're doing, like an effect that buffs all your creatures, so that helps you close out the game if you have a ton of creatures, that is something you have to consider as well. And that's kind of synergies we're looking for. But once again, the cards have to be good on their own. If you're playing bad cards, it's unacceptable.
You're gonna have a bad deck in general.
Yeah.
This is a very good example of if you take something like Anja Falkenrath. She has a whole bunch of madness synergies. I mean, she explodes with madness. But all the madness cards are terrible on their own. So when you don't have Anja, your deck is miserable. But when you have Anja in play, you have a blasting synergy. But you don't want that. You want to have... Because there are actually some good madness cards that are individually good on their own. But those are just too few. So the deck in general will be a bad deck. And you don't want that. You want a good deck in general that has a lot of synergies as well.
That's why when I started playing, I fell for that very, very harshly. And because I played Breya originally as a competitive deck. And the reason that I played Breya, that this was before the 5-color decks were the most popular thing. The reason I played Breya was because she had access to all the colors that I wanted. So I could it was just a pile of all the best cards and then combos. Like,
I think you played Breya before Protein Hulk was legal in the format as well. I might.
Yes. Wait. Yeah. That's worth pointing out. It was essentially just after Breya was released as a card. So I that was the reason. The when I wanted to add a new card, the competition for my slots were insane. Kind of how it is today. The decks are so tight, and the decks become so different. Like they become so similar in the core parts because the slots are incredibly tight. So, but it is that kind of synergy decision that will put your deck above the edge. Like people always say that these tier 1 or tier 0 decks or whatever are the decks to play, and it's really hard to reach these heights. And that's usually not because what people think at first, which is like the combos, like the finisher is a little bit more efficient. Of course that helps, but if you're doing something great like Protein Hulk combos or something that's considered weak like Splinter Twin combos, of course the Protein Hulk combos are going to be better because they're more mana efficient, that both kill your opponents just the same way. The difference with the Hulk package usually has it's tighter. It has a lot of good cards. It has more support for what it's trying to do. And that I think is especially true with the consultation combos, where there's so much support for these, interact. Like there's so many versions you can play, and you can play stuff like Praetor's Grasp to kind
Yes.
of very easily get it going. I think that's like the synergies that push it over the top, but people don't realize it. Like there's not that much difference, like winning using Splinter Twin combo and
Winning is winning. It doesn't matter
Hull
how you
combo.
get
Winning
there.
is winning, right? Right.
Yeah.
The difference is not like 2 mana less to combo off or
Mm-hmm.
1 card less to combo off. The most important part is what are you actually doing and what cards do you have to put in your deck to make this work?
Yes.
Because
exactly.
playing good cards is the key. Yeah.
Let's move to this subject. So you suddenly sit in a game and
Yes.
you realize you ain't gonna win with your combo because it's been disrupted and you're not really getting there. There's so many problems in the way, and you suddenly start to realize I might actually have to try to win this game with Beatdown. How should you proceed? And one thing I've realized is that I usually pick one player to kill first, and I go one by one. I don't want to go all of them at the same time. If I'm unable to actually attack one player with a creature, I will attack another player instead, but I really want to focus at one specific person. And I hopefully want to get my other teammates on the board here to kill that player as well, so I can just kill them. Or have you some of your own thoughts about this?
Look, we're playing cEDH, so first of all, we're trying to win. Like, let's get Scat on the table. Secondly, I think that it depends if you are the most likely player to win at the table, because of course you should try to you personally should try to focus one player. But if you are the most likely player to win the game at this point, considering where the game state is, right? As you're saying, it's kind of slowed down. It's people fizzled. People have less cards. It kind of becomes a creature fight or a rush between creature fight and like getting to your C combos or your B combos.
Yeah, some player could actually be very close to reaching it, and you are very far behind.
In that scenario, you clearly have to kill the player who's trying to win. But you should also keep in mind, what happens if this player dies? Because if there's one player, say, who's packing a lot of interaction, you will have to, like, no matter how fast you are, creatures cannot outrun combos, even the B combos, like as if that was the start of the game. Because if that was the case, we'd just play creatures, like it'd be a creature format, but it's not. It's a combo format. You need to kill 3 players, and to do that, you combo. It's not harder than that. So you have to keep in mind what you are doing and what you're achieving when you're trying to kill someone. But of course, you should try to focus on one player because spreading out damage is a casual move. It's more quote unquote fun because it doesn't eliminate one player early, so they have to wait for a long time.
And you're being more fair and friendly.
Right, but that doesn't matter. Just kill the person who's the largest threat to you. But keep in mind that if you're doing combat, you are probably not going to be the first player to win, but you might be the second player to win if the first player who tries to go on it for its B or C combo gets interacted with again, like gets counterspelled or interrupted somehow.
Yeah, this is going back to what we talked about in the beginning, why combat is bad and why it's tricky, because if you start killing them one by one, you might give the win to someone because you've removed the other 2 people that are able to interact with that guy. So you need to think about who you're gonna leave last man standing a little bit too.
Yeah, especially since if you're playing creatures, on average you'll less interaction. That's just true, right? If you're playing no creatures, you have to pack interaction. You have to play more counterspell, more spot removal, and more board wipes. You just have to, or you die. Unless you're like an all-in combo deck, which there's a few of. They play almost no creatures and then they just try to win as fast as possible. But the thing about those decks is that they, at this point of the game, they lost, right?
Yeah.
Like, you just have no. If you're all-in combo, like my Brea deck was, I play like 5 creatures, and my late game I had 2 combos, and then my late game was 4 wheels. It's like, I'm not trying to wheel and then combo off again. Yeah, exactly. But like Necropod, what am I drawing into? So it's essentially you are in really, really bad situation, and you have to play your outs in a different way. But that's really a topic for another video. I think that the thing you have to just consider is that to close out the game with creatures, you need a ton of interaction.
Yeah.
Unless your deck, it's one of the creature decks. There's a few.
there's a very good example of a deck actually for that, and that's Nagella Tempo. And if you look at that deck, and I say it's probably one of the most aggressive creature beatdown decks in the game, and when you look at the deck, it's like 33 instants with control power. So it's a really heavy control deck with only Nagella at the helm trying to win. It has infinite combat steps, but it can win games by just Nagella beats and a huge amount of tokens. But that deck is filled with interactions. It's really trying to survive combo from your opponents.
Yeah. I think the even better example, honestly, is just Blood Pod, which, the entire deck is just built around the fact that you have to prevent your opponents from going off. It's not interaction, it is stacks. And stacks, they do play a little bit of interaction, but not that much. And it's just the other type of spectrum where you, instead of trying to wait for your opponent to do something, you do something first, which is preferable for creature decks, right? Because if you have, say you have Aven Mind Sensor, Aven Mind Sensor happen to be very good once on the battlefield as well. But generally, that's the card you want to play in response to your opponent doing something. There's a few others. Containment Priest is also one. And the cards you want to play in response to your opponent to get the true value, so have them walk into it. But the awkward thing is that those, you want to play creatures early and you start slamming with them. A card like Thalia, the original Thalia, a Garden of Thraben, she is great because you can play her on turn 2. And she has an effect on the game. She slows down your opponents, so she's kind of like a preemptive interaction. But then you get to attack during all these turns while you would sit and wait with like a counter spell in your hand. And this is better for creatures because creatures enjoy being on the board. Like they enjoy being on the board and pressuring your opponent. There's playing a creature on turn 15 is not going to be much pressure. Like,
no,
unless your opponent is decking. Then the creature doesn't matter anyway. This card is probably not going to give you a right to the win. So
this is actually bringing up a tiny subject we're not going to touch. There's a huge debate about let's ban Tymna or let's keep Tymna unbanned. And I want to point something out that I really enjoyed that Tymna came because Tymna brought a kind of combat to the format. Because before Tymna we didn't have Hate Bear Beatdown, but with Tymna and Blood Pod you can suddenly use Tymna as your card drawing engine, utilizing all your hate pieces, all your hate bears.
Yeah, I think so too. And she makes a lot of this. Tymna is a great example. If you're playing a Thrasios deck and you happen to have mana dorks, which you probably do, Llanowar elves of the sort, it's very easy to add Tymna because she synergizes. She's a great example of a card that is powerful on her own. Like you could honestly play Tymna if you're playing like 3 other creatures in the deck. She'd be fine. She wouldn't be great, but she would be fine.
You have a partner anyway, so you're always gonna have
right, exactly. So like that's really enough. Playing Thrasios on turn 2 and then Tymna on turn 3 is like honestly good enough. So she has the power level. I don't think anyone here will argue that Tymna isn't powerful enough. But she's a great example that
To make a really good example why Tymna is really good, imagine playing Tymna as the only commander. That would actually be a decent casual deck.
If you got blue, she'd be a decent competitive deck.
She was 3 mana, black, white, and blue. She would be a competitive deck, and without partner.
Yes. If she didn't have partner, she'd still be competitive, I think. She's just great. Sorry. But
it's okay.
I think that she's a great example of the synergy we're looking for because she has the power level. But picking her over some other partner is an easy decision because if you're playing Thrasios, you are most likely playing mana dorks, and the power level raise of Tymna because of the synergy is enough to put her over the edge. Even if she was a little bit weaker, so other partners would be competitive to play. They'd be more attractive if Tymna was a little bit weaker. Say she was a 1/1 and no lifelink, for example. She would still be pushed over the edge. Probably, maybe not, but she'd still be pushed because of the synergy that you gain. And there's no cost to you. There's no cost adding the synergy in the deck. Adding a board wipe or adding a removal spell or adding a counter spell or adding a new combo has opportunity cost. It has slots in your deck that you could have used for something that you really need for your meta. But when you just add cards that create synergy, they create value out of thin air. That's what synergy actually means.
This is where it's really where the talent in the deck construction becomes really important. You have to find cards that are individually good on their own and synergize with each other and complete a whole complete functional beautiful deck, and that is really hard actually.
It's incredibly hard. There's so many small decisions that goes into it, and that's why it's almost impossible to build a great deck on its own. You have to tune it because usually it's very hard to catch these small synergies unless you have like
Yes.
very specific draws. Just looking at the cards, you can catch a few, right? There's playing Finale of Devastation and creatures. That's fair, if you can get to the mana, it's a win condition. Of course, that's something you can see beforehand. But how many creatures do I need in my deck to make Tymna work, to make her worth it over someone else? That is something that, you can sit down and crunch the numbers, but it's probably roughly as fast, maybe a little bit slower, just play the games. Because
Yeah.
you'd notice in like 3 games, because she's your commander, she accesses her every single game. It's harder when they're not your commander, because then you need like a very specific draw, right? And a good example here that's off creatures, or off combat at least, is Wheels and Notion Thief. There's a bunch of decks that play Notion Thief because it's a fantastic card. It's a great stacks card. On Flash, it's pretty insane. And then you have Wheels, which are just really good if you're trying to combo, because they can get you back from really bad spots. And these two cards together are fantastic. They're
Individually
essentially
good on their own.
Exactly. They're individually good on their own, and they're essentially a combo. Like the synergy is so high that it's a combo, right?
Yes.
So that's a great example of something you might not notice. But the question is here: say Notion Thief, you think Notion Thief costs too much mana for your deck. How many Wheels do you need to make her good? That's something you can probably crunch the numbers, but it's some hyper geometric calculations that I think most people wouldn't do. I think that people would just play games and try to figure out how is this card good when I don't have a wheel. That's a very different game. And how often do I have the wheel? That's maybe hard to quantify without actually taking notes, which I recommend people doing if they're trying to tune a deck. How to note down, did I draw the synergy, and what happened when I did, or what happened when I didn't. It's good to have these things concretely down so you remember, because it's easy to forget, and it's easy to trick yourself that something's good when it's actually not, or vice versa, honestly. But I think it's just like keeping track of these synergies, and I think that combat, like being able to close out the game when everyone fizzles, is this kind of synergy.
Yes. So let's say you really love combat and you want to have that element in your deck, but you're playing cEDH. You also want to play some cEDH. What commander should you go for, do you think? And what form of deck maybe should you go for? We've talked about a few decks here. Like we talked about Bloodpod. Bloodpod is a combat deck.
It is absolutely exactly. I think it's definitely like up there. And if you want to play combat, you should play Bloodpod. I think that the other deck we mentioned, the Najeela,
we mentioned her.
Yeah.
I actually think Kenrith has a lot of beating power. He reanimates creatures. He actually gives creatures +1/+1 counters. I've seen people actually do that.
Yeah.
So he definitely beats.
I think it's a great example because of his reanimation ability. I think that just playing a little bit larger creatures, if they're worth playing. If I think that for this kind of discussion, I think actually Taziger is a fantastic example, because Taziger is with Delve is reasonably priced, especially when the game kind of slows down. He
will be able to keep on fighting.
He will be able to keep on fighting. He will stop your opponents from fighting. And he's good with his ability if the game stalls out. So I think he's a great example. And playing cards, you could play 99 him and theoretically and play him with Kenrith, and a little bit larger cards like that tend to synergize very well with reanimation, because obviously you get more for your mana.
Yeah, you could activate Taziger, put a few cards into your graveyard, and then reanimate the really big and stompy creatures from your graveyard.
Yeah, or just bring Taziger back if it's needed, depending on. I think that just these kind of thoughts, I'm not saying like the example itself is like what you should do, but it's something that's worth considering when you're playing these decks, because if your opponent is better at you in this, when the game fizzles out, say the game fizzles out 15% of the time, if your deck is just the best at these times, essentially what Bloodpod tries to do, like Bloodpod tries to force the game into becoming this every single time and then being the best at it then, I think that if you are the best, that's 15+ win rate.
Yes. That
Assuming you
is true.
take them all, you probably won't. But 15% plus win rate. Say you take half of them, so it's like 7.5% increased win rate. That's insane. And if you don't have to let up so many slots because of it, it's something worth considering.
Yeah, you could basically say that, okay, in the beginning of the game, if you sit down and realize, if we get to that position where I'm gonna be at 15% higher win rate because we're in this strange situation, I'm gonna win in this situation, then you could
Yeah.
basically move your entire game towards that situation where everyone is just suffering and you are the only one who's able to win.
There's a theory that comes from Limited originally, I think, which is
Ooh.
called "Who's the Beatdown." It's one of the most famous articles in Magic ever written. I don't remember who wrote it just now. We
Do we
can
have a
put
link
it
for it?
probably in some. We can probably fix one.
Oh,
And it's a very famous article from about limited Magic, and essentially every game of Magic. If you remove that there are a lot of weird decks that act very strangely, which does not exist in limited in draft, there will always be one.
they do
There's
exist in
always
CDH.
yeah, they do
Weird
exist in CDH, but that's the thing. When people fizzle, they don't exist anymore
No, true.
generally. So that's the point. Like because what you were saying is that you can kind of move your game towards this longer fizzle life of the game. Because in Who's the Beatdown, it's about this. In every game of Magic, there are two players. Now, this is from Limited. And generally, if the game goes long, if the game goes infinitely long, but before decking, right, one player will be favored to win. There will be one
Yes.
player who has more evasion, or larger creatures, or a bomb, or something that makes them win, or maybe a great mana sink that will make them win if the game goes to turn 20.
Yes,
And that means
I agree here.
that if if you that means that if you are the player who is in that position, who will win if the game goes to 20, when you get the option of attacking and dealing 2 damage to your opponent, and then you take 2 damage because you don't have a blocker, you should never ever do it, because it is all downside. When both players take 2 damage, your win percentage goes down because the chance of the game going long decreases. And it's a very standard thing to fundamentally misunderstand how this works. And like, you don't realize that you're on the beatdown. You have to beat your opponent down, or you will lose on turn 20. And then you like to play defensively, and you don't lose 5% win rate. You put your effective win rate to 0. You can get lucky and draw your way out of it. But just if you have to attack and you're not attacking, you lose. And this is the kind of thing that can happen in a fizzled cEDH game. If there's one player who is really, really good, if the game just goes to complete standstill,
Yes.
that everyone else is on the beatdown, except that in the cEDH, the beatdown is generally a combo. Right? It's trying to combo off, because having creatures and fighting while your opponent has fizzled and they're trying to find their pieces, that is kind of like the control finisher, It's how the game would end up in limited, but instead the person who's slow is attacking and the person who's fast is comboing, which is not what would happen in limited. But back to the decks, I think, that we're recommending. So I mentioned Jisan.
Yeah, I wanna say here, after hearing everything you basically said, I think I wanna put Kenrith almost at the top together with a few others. But I think Kenrith is going up against Kenrith decks in late game. I realized he is a king in beatdown. He is a king when it comes to like being the what did you call it? Being the beatdown deck, or being
one player's on the beatdown. Who's the beatdown? One player is the beatdown, and they have to close out the game. There's some confusing language here because the beatdown is it's reversed in Commander. The person who's fighting is not the beatdown, right? The beatdown is the person has to win first. So let's call it the person who likes it when they go long, the long player, right?
Okay.
So
I will say that Kenrith is the commander that likes to go the long game. I would also put Ceesay with the captain here.
I think because the thing that happens with cEDH commanders, which makes this creature less relevant, is the fact that it's very popular to play mana sink commanders as your commander. They're very good because infinite mana is like the easiest way to win. So generating infinite mana is usually the go-to. Like standard, it's the most common way to win if we group all the infinite mana combos ish. Maybe not anymore, honestly, with consultation and whatnot. But either way, It's a very easy way to win. With the result is that people play these mana sink commanders, and mana sink tends to maybe trump. Like it puts a lot of pressure, similar how to creatures would. So things like Kendrith and Thrasios, these will excel when the game slows down because they can rule the game by just having a ton of mana and a ton of time. And then when you have a ton of mana and time, things become crazy.
And the thing is that you can't put too much mana ramp into that deck because they can't have enough mana. They can always take more mana because they can always do things with their mana. So the late game, okay, I'm at 16 mana. Imagine what you can do with 16 mana and a Cisse, a Kenrith, a Thrasios. What else do we got? Tasigur, the Golden Fang. You can do your late game is gonna be huge just because you have 16 mana and only your commander.
I think that's what puts these. I'm gonna tell you a few commanders, but I think that puts these commanders over the top. Like Tasigur, Thrasios, Kendrith, like these types of commanders, they block well. And they generate mana, which the blocking prevents your opponents from winning through pressure, winning through creatures. It stops all of this we're talking about, right?
Yes.
But it also gives them a way to close out the game in this shitty situation where they sit there where they're 11 mana and they're drawing top deck mode, land, go. And then if you have a mana sink, that becomes insanely valuable. That's how you close out the game. That's the reason I stopped playing Breya, right? I couldn't compete with Thrasios.
Yeah.
I stopped playing her because, at one point you run out of artifacts and then it's over, right? And it's not reasonable to start sacrificing her like every other turn because the mana, like I'm just not ramping too that much. Like I'm not gonna be able to cast her.
You kind of have to sacrifice your Breya to kill the other Thrasios, so the Thrasios doesn't sit there and do what he wants to do.
Exactly.
I have a good example. I've been playing some food chain sliver decks, and I've seen games where they just I cast my sliver as cascade into mana dork, pass turn. And then they take their turn, they have nothing to do, they have a huge amount of mana, but they can't use it. And then just pause the turn again.
I think that's the primary reason why Kendrith has taken over as 5-color decks. Like, he just wins when things fizzle, because he's a big guy, and he has very, very big abilities. He has the most mana sinks of any ability. Please correct me if I'm wrong. He has a ton to do. And a lot, he has a lot of abilities, and every single one is relevant. Like, there's not a single ability that is never relevant.
When I made a review video on the Kendrith deck, I said the white ability isn't that useful, but after playing against the guy, I mean, the white ability is so annoying. You can't kill the guy in late game because he just keeps on gaining back your life. Huge a tip or a suggestion: if you want to kill the Kendrith deck, use your commander. Commander damage will kill him. His life is infinite, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's also worth noting, because I have closed out in similar situations. I have closed out the game because I was playing Kess, and Kess has flying, and she has a fair power, which means that you can actually kill people. Like, evasion on your commander with fair power is also a way to go, because this closes out the game fast enough. I think that honestly, if there's a Kendrith player at the table, I think that unless you have like a finisher effect, which is essentially a combo, like the Final of Devastation. I think that Kendrith will probably run the table, like in combat, like no matter what you're doing. Even like as long as like 3-player doesn't gang up on the Kendrith player, I think that everyone just falls behind if they're trying to creature grind against him. Maybe like there's a few examples, like Blood Pod can of course do it. Nigella can probably make it work too, because that's their primarily game plans. Like, it's not fair to say, hey, let's fight against creatures, and then you have decks who want to go to combat. That's their primary
Nigella can probably kill Kendrith eventually. I mean, Nigella has.
I think so. I think so too. I think so.
Yeah. Unless Kendrith...
But
Kendrith can actually... Oh, and Nigella can actually utilize her mana when I think about it. She can actually get some extra combo steps and... Yeah. So there's actually a lot of different commanders with the beatdown potential. But I think you want mana... Just like you said, mana sync seems to be a good indicator if the commander is going to be functional late game. Just as you explained, Breya was falling off when the game got long because she couldn't really mana sync.
Yeah, look, Breya, if Breya had, say it cost 3 mana and you didn't have to sacrifice 2 artifacts, Breya would be crazy. Like, she'd be absolutely crazy. Like, she'd run the table. Or even a 4 mana, it'd be a completely different world.
Yeah.
but she's just not good enough because of this, right? She's a 4/4. She's an artifact. Like, she has everything going for her, except her abilities cost. The cost is just too high. They're excellent too. They're similar, very similar to Kenrith, and. But like overall, I think that the Mana Sinks will win, especially if the Mana Sink is attached to a good blocker, because then it becomes even harder to win using creatures. But I think that in the end, I think considering creature combat, like fizzle creature combat, during deck building and during how you play, like, do I remove their blocker or do I remove their mana ramper? Like, if there's a way you could close out the game if you remove their blocker, maybe that's the way to go. Like, thinking about it, considering it is always, it's your job as a player, cEDH player trying to win. You have to consider everything that lets you win, right? And this does let you win sometimes. But I think that if you want to make this a strategy, like you want to make it a thing that your deck does, Mana Sinks will win over creatures, but creatures have a very low opportunity cost. To be fair, Mana Sinks have a very low opportunity cost as well, but creatures have a very low opportunity cost because you play most of them even though you would never attack.
I think that summarizes and concludes a little bit of everything we talked about. The combat is really tricky in cEDH. It happens, but it's gonna happen when it happens, and you should probably think about how you should deck build to have that option if you want to have that option if the game becomes like that. And there are a few commanders that we talked about that have that potential of going late game, and Mana Sink seems to be the cool pathway.
Right.
Thank you for watching, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video and that it brought you something. I would like to give an extra special thanks to all of my patrons that supports me and helps this channel to grow. And if you like what I do and you wanna support me, feel free to share my videos. Also, purchasing cards from the TCG Players website using the affiliate link down below will also help the channel grow. So a big thank you to all of you.